Imagine leaving the woman who held you down through your darkest moments, through prison, through industry shade, through every scandal that could have ended your career before it even took off, only to be dumped, in public, by the one you left her for. And I'm not talking about a quiet, behind-the-scenes breakup. No, I'm talking about Claressa, the G of AT Shields, allegedly kicking Papoose to the curb like last season's sneakers, without so much as a backward glance. And the streets? Oh, they ate it up. Because nothing tastes sweeter than watching someone who once bragged about unshakable loyalty get served a cold plate of public humiliation. In an industry where perception is everything, Papoose had crafted the perfect image. Steady, dependable, the guy who stayed when everyone else would have left. He became hip-hop's golden example of a ride-or-die husband. But when this scandal hit, that image shattered in slow motion, like glass dropping from a rooftop. Suddenly, the man who once inspired hashtags about true love was now the subject of memes, TikToks, and Twitter threads roasting him for days. And the worst part, even the people who tried to defend him at first ended up switching sides once the receipts started rolling in. To understand how badly things went off the rails, you have to go back to the beginning, when Papoose and Remy Ma were the hip-hop power couple everyone loved to root for. This was more than just two rappers linking up. This was a story of loyalty that played out in real time. When Remy was sentenced to a 6-year prison bid, Papoose didn't just talk about holding her down, he lived it. Every week, without fail, he visited her. He talked about her in interviews, he defended her name in public, and he made it clear that no amount of time behind bars would break their bond. That image, Pap in the visiting room, hand in hand with Remy, became etched in rap history as the ultimate symbol of commitment. Fans respected him. Even people who didn't listen to his music knew him as the loyal husband of Remy Ma. He wasn't just living the vows, he was making them part of his brand. In an industry that thrives on chaos and betrayal, he was an outlier, the exception to the rule. When Remy was finally released, the reunion was like a fairy tale ending. They hit red carpets together, dropped collaborations, and smiled through interviews like they'd just survived the ultimate test of love. For a while, it seemed unshakable, like the kind of relationship even Hollywood couldn't script. But fairy tales don't always end in happily ever afters. Sometimes, the plot takes a turn you never saw coming. Fast forward a few years, and whispers start floating around the industry. Nothing concrete at first, just little murmurs. Papoose had been spotted at a handful of Claressa Shields' promotional events. Now, on paper, there was nothing wrong with that. Pap was no stranger to mingling with champions, rubbing shoulders with athletes, and showing up where the cameras were. But people started noticing differences. The energy between him and Claressa didn't look like casual friendship. There were the lingering hugs, the private conversations tucked away in dark corners, the little smiles that lingered just a second too long. And in the age of camera phones, those moments don't just vanish, they circulate. At first, people brushed it off as harmless networking. Claressa was, after all, the face of women's boxing, a superstar in her own right, and Pap had connections in every lane of the entertainment world. But soon, that networking turned into something that didn't seem so harmless. He wasn't just at the big public events anymore. He was showing up to training camps, photo shoots, even private dinners that had nothing to do with Remy. The proximity was starting to raise eyebrows. And when the right people start paying attention, the rumors don't stay small for long. This is where the plot thickens. Multiple sources, people close to both Pap and Claressa, started describing what they called undeniable chemistry. This wasn't some whirlwind fling. This was a slow burn, a steady escalation of subtle flirting and private moments that eventually snowballed into full-on affair rumors. And remember, Claressa was allegedly engaged at the time. The stakes weren't just high, they were dangerous. When word reached Remy Ma, things got personal. Remy isn't new to controversy, but this was a different kind of heat. This wasn't some industry beef or media misunderstanding, this was her marriage. According to insiders, she confronted Papoose in private, giving him a chance to shut the rumors down once and for all. Instead, he made what would go down as his first major mistake. He doubled down, defending Claressa, brushing off Remy's concerns as jealousy. That moment, more than any other, was the point of no return. In a relationship built on loyalty, dismissing your partner's feelings in favor of another woman is like setting fire to the foundation. And once you light that match, it's only a matter of time before the whole structure burns down. Mistake number 2. Underestimating the power of receipts in 2025. You can't sneeze without someone catching it in 4K these days. And according to people close to the situation, the receipts were damning. We're talking late-night texts with you up, energy, inside jokes, and flirty compliments that no married man should be sending to a woman who isn't his wife. These alleged messages weren't just friendly, they were intimate. They were the smoking gun Remy needed to confirm her worst fears. Faced with the fallout, Papoose didn't do the logical thing. He didn't try to mend the relationship, didn't go into damage control. Instead, he made a move so bold, so reckless, it would change the trajectory of his life. He chose Claressa. He walked away from Remy Ma, the woman who had held him down through years of public and private battles, for a woman who was already tied to another man. It was the kind of decision that turns you from hero to villain overnight. And the streets, they noticed. Social media lit up like Times Square. Twitter threads popped up dissecting every moment Pap and Claressa had shared in the past year, frame-by-frame breakdowns of their interactions like it was the Zapruder film. TikTok creators went wild, overlaying old footage with dramatic captions like, "This didn't age well." At first, some fans tried to defend him, saying he deserved happiness, but when Claressa's engagement came into the spotlight, the narrative flipped. Suddenly, it wasn't a love story, it was a home-wrecking scandal. And that's when karma stepped into the ring. Not long after Pap and Remy's split became public, Claressa Shields shocked everyone by going public with her own breakup from Papoose. And she didn't do it quietly. According to sources, she allegedly told him directly, in no uncertain terms, that it was over. Her focus, she said, was shifting back to herself and, as rumors suggest, possibly rekindling things with her original fiancé. The humiliation was instant and brutal. Imagine burning down the only safe harbor you've ever known, only to find yourself stranded in the middle of a storm with no rescue in sight. That's where Pap found himself, abandoned by the woman he left his marriage for, iced out by the wife who had once been his biggest supporter, and roasted online by an audience that used to cheer for him. The man who once embodied loyalty had now become a cautionary tale for bad decisions in love and life. And then came the silence. The thing about Remy Ma is, she doesn't need to speak to make a statement. She didn't drop any interviews, didn't subtweet him, didn't spill tea to the blogs. She just stayed quiet. And in a world where everyone's rushing to air out their side of the story, that silence was deafening. Because silence from someone like Remy isn't weakness, it's strategy. However, after months of silence, endless rumors, and a social media firestorm that left his reputation hanging by a thread, Papoose has finally decided to tell his side of the story. And what he revealed is not what anyone expected. No backtracking, no desperate apologies, no carefully scripted PR fluff. Instead, Pap dropped a bombshell. Claressa Shields, the same Claressa that so many accused of being at the center of his marriage breakdown, was, in his own words, the best thing that ever happened to me. It wasn't just the words themselves that set the internet ablaze, it was the way he said them. Calm, deliberate, and with the kind of conviction that makes you believe he's not trying to win anyone's sympathy. He wasn't shaking, stammering, or dodging the question. He leaned forward, looked the interviewer straight in the eye, and owned it. And in that moment, you could practically hear hip-hop Twitter splitting into two camps. The ones who thought he'd lost his mind, and the ones who wondered if maybe, just maybe, Pap was telling a truth the rest of us weren't ready to hear. When that interview clip hit social media, it spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about it. Blogs threw up their fastest hot takes. Reaction videos popped up within the hour. And the streets. Oh, they were in chaos. The reactions ranged from pure disbelief, people saying he must be trolling, to genuine curiosity about what could have happened behind the scenes to make Pap put Claressa on that pedestal, even after all the backlash. Let's be clear, Papoose saying anything publicly about Claressa was already risky. This is a man who, for years, cultivated an image built on loyalty, stability, and the kind of romantic devotion that hip-hop rarely celebrates. The story of him holding down Remy Ma during her 6-year prison sentence wasn't just gossip, it was part of his brand. He was the guy who stayed when others would have left, who kept visiting, kept writing, kept showing up week after week. And that's why his recent confession hit so hard. Because whether you loved it or hated it, one thing became obvious. Pap was willing to tear down the very image that made him a cultural symbol if it meant standing by what he believes about Claressa Shields. Now, before we get into why Pap says she was the best thing that ever happened to him, we need to rewind the clock to where this all began. According to Pap, their paths crossed at a promotional event. nothing romantic, nothing scandalous at first. He described it as one of those moments you don't see coming. He was there doing his usual networking, connecting with athletes, industry people, and movers in different lanes. And then she walked in, Claressa Shields, already a world champion, already the kind of woman who could command the energy of a room without saying a word. He says the first thing he noticed wasn't her fame or even her beauty, it was her energy. That magnetic pull, the way she carried herself like she knew exactly who she was and where she was going. They spoke briefly that day, just casual conversation, but he admits something about that first interaction stuck with him. In the weeks that followed, their paths kept crossing at industry events, at charity functions, even in casual social settings. And each time, Pap says, there was an undeniable spark. Not in the reckless, instant infatuation way, but in the slow, deep way that makes you start questioning your own life and whether you're really living it to the fullest. In the interview, Pap didn't shy away from talking about what drew him to Claressa beyond the surface. He described her as someone who refused to accept mediocrity, not just in herself, but in the people she kept close. She was relentless in her goals, uncompromising in her standards, and unapologetic about demanding the same level of focus and ambition from others. And for Pap, who admits he'd been coasting in certain areas of his life, that was a wake-up call. He went as far as to say that Claressa made him realize he'd been stuck in a routine, comfortable, maybe even happy on the surface, but not growing. She was like a mirror he didn't know he needed, reflecting back the parts of himself he'd been avoiding. He said, "Claressa taught me how to stop just surviving and start evolving. She made me face the truth about the man I was and the man I wanted to become." Those are heavy words, especially when you consider the cost of that realization. Because acknowledging her impact meant indirectly admitting that something in his old life wasn't working anymore. And that brings us to the risk he took. We all know the headlines. Pap leaving Remy Ma after years of marriage and public devotion, stepping into a relationship with Claressa Shields, and setting the internet on fire. It wasn't just a personal choice, it was a career gamble. Overnight, he went from being celebrated as the ultimate ride-or-die husband to being dragged as the villain in a scandalous love triangle. Memes flooded timelines. Think pieces dissected his fall from grace. People he thought would have his back went silent, and even some of his day ones questioned his judgment. But in Pap's mind, the risk was worth it. He admitted that it hurt to lose the public's respect and that he underestimated how brutal the backlash would be. But he also said that walking away from Claressa, knowing what she brought out in him, would have been the bigger regret. In his own words, "People think I lost everything when I chose Claressa. Truth is, I found parts of myself I didn't even know I had." For Pap, it wasn't about winning public approval, it was about personal growth, even if the price was his image. Of course, the public only saw one side, the drama, the scandal, the tabloid-ready headlines. But Pap insists the private reality was much deeper. Behind closed doors, he says Claressa was a source of motivation and focus, constantly challenging him to think bigger, push harder, and take risks he might have avoided before. He credits her with reigniting his drive, not just in music, but in life. And here's where the divide in public opinion gets even sharper. To some, Pap's praise of Claressa sounds like romanticizing a messy situation. To others, it's a rare moment of honesty in an industry where most people rewrite their history to fit the public narrative. Because if you strip away the gossip and the hurt feelings, what you're left with is a man saying, without shame, that someone came into his life, flipped it upside down, and left him better than they found him. Whether you agree with his choices or not, there's something undeniably bold about claiming that truth so openly. Every day she stayed quiet, the internet filled in the blanks for her. Fans and critics alike spun their own versions of the story, most of them painting Papoose as the man who traded a queen for a gamble and lost it all. And the longer Remy kept her peace, the more control she had over the narrative. It wasn't just her watching his downfall, it was the entire internet, popcorn in hand, waiting for the next chapter to drop. So here's where we're at. Papoose, once the poster child for hip-hop loyalty, is now the face of one of the most talked-about scandals in recent memory. Claressa's moved on, Remy's thriving in silence, and Pap, well, he's walking around with that 1,000-yard stare, mumbling about mistakes and what could have been. The question is, did he get exactly what he deserved, or is there more to this story that we haven't heard yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one hip-hop plot twist that's far from over. And if you're here for the real stories behind the headlines, Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the culture's wildest moments.